How you doing? You are tuned to the only program who cares about your needs. Fiscally conservative, socially responsible. We are the Independents. Jesse Meyerson was an Occupy Wall Street leader who's making waves this week with a Rolling Stone article that lays out his 5-point plan to save millennials. I was particularly intrigued with the idea of taking back the land. So, Jesse, welcome.
Thanks for having me on.
5 points, a lot of action. So you want guaranteed work, a universal basic income, you want to take back the land, make everything owned by everybody, and public banks.
What do you think?
Sounds great.
Fabulous. We're all in accord. Well, this was a great segment.
Yeah. Thanks for coming. Here, give me your tie.
Oh.
No, give it to me.
Give it to you.
Yeah. Take it off. Give it to me.
It belongs to all of us.
Exactly. It belongs to all of us.
As
That's
does your
my
sweater.
point.
I like
the sweater.
Yeah, well, you know, your property rights work the same way, libertarians, right? Like, if I wanted your things, let's say I decided to lay claim to your property and go to your house, and I said I don't recognize the legitimacy of your claim, how are you going to get me out? You got to call big government, and they're going to show up with their guns, and they're going to take me out.
I wouldn't wait for big government, I don't think.
You would just shoot me?
No problem.
Well, then you would go to prison, because I'm sorry, but the state has
Well, then I would own the cell, wouldn't I? Fantastic.
Let's talk about the most libertarian one of these, just to see if we can get a swap going here. The number two, you're talking about a Social Security for all, or universal guaranteed basic income. This is actually something that Milton Friedman talked about, much to Camille's chagrin and other people. The libertarian argument for this is like, great, let's get rid of bureaucracy and let's write people a check and they can spend their own money.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, but you have to get rid of certain taxes in order to do that.
You don't necessarily have to get rid of taxes. Let's leave taxes aside. So can we do a swap, you and I, right here, commie, libertarian, whatever, can I trade away all of these welfare state kind of bureaucracies and let's just write checks to people instead?
Not all, but an awful lot of them. I mean, you can reduce an awful lot of spending this way. It obviates the need for a bunch of things, but you do need, like, there's a guy, Matt Brunig, who blogs for Demos, who's a friend of mine, who has a really good blog post on this about why you can't do away with all of the welfare state. He proposes a sort of tiered system where everybody gets a universal basic income, and there's a supplementary income for disability, and there's a supplementary income for parents and people who just have different needs.
That's kind of the same thing. I think the problem is it's so fractured that even though, you know, you've got something like the SNAP program, you've got money for food stamps, but you don't need to buy food. You need to pay rent, but you can't do it with that specific entitlement. So it's so fractured at this point that it actually does a great disservice to the people it's trying to help.
That, or you could just have everybody on food stamps.
And Matt, you already invoked Milton Friedman, and it's moments like this and conversations like this where I really miss him the most, because he would always talk about rent control, for example, and that's another one of the topics that you brought up. I wonder if you're not approaching this from the demand side and only considering that, and not giving enough consideration to the fact that you have policies like rent control, you have these zoning boards which are in fact constraining the supply of housing, which, if you're concerned about how much it costs to live someplace, giving more housing to people or more housing options is the #1 way to actually make things better. Simply taking away property, giving it to everyone else in common, at some point people are going to fight, because everyone wants to live along Central Park. Everyone wants to live in 8 Spruce Street downtown in New York, one of the most luxurious buildings in town. How do you allocate things if not with prices? And prices are not simply set by fiat, they emerge. We can agree on that fact, right?
Absolutely. So if your preferred method for directing the value of the land, which, as I say, none of us made, right? The value of the land, if you're religious, God gave you the land, and if you're not religious, nature provided.
Yeah, but the value is not inherent. Value is subjective. Like
value is communal, right? So the reason I pay so much for my apartment,
communal and subjective
are not the same
thing. Different things.
I don't necessarily want to live where you live.
The reason I pay so much for my apartment is because there are 2 convenient subways nearby, there are wonderful parks in the area, there's great food in the area, and that is all thanks to the city, the state, the community, things that are not my landlord. So I don't know why my landlord has to suck up all that value. What I was going to say is
that's called emergent.
Had to pay more for the building to rent out each unit.
Yeah, that's all leveraged anyway, and they pay off the interest with the full rent value.
It's all leveraged until you own a mortgage. I mean, until you have an actual mortgage, it's theoretical, it's leveraged. It doesn't make sense.
We've just gone through a housing crisis where outside of New York York and Washington, D.C., people who thought that they could make it as landlords ended up taking a huge bath.
Well, I'll tell you
ended
what,
up underwater
a land
in all of
value
these
tax
rental properties.
would have just obliterated that speculative bubble, because the commodity that they were speculating on was the value of the land. And if you reduce, this was Henry George's whole point. This is the classical economist point, and Adam Smith. If you reduce the value of a property to its actual physical infrastructure and take away the value of the land and just communalize that, then it prevents speculative bubbles like that. I want to address what you said about deregulating the zoning, because that would need to come along. In an urban context, if you wanted to have a land value tax, you would, in order to accommodate the demand for the supply, you have to increase the housing supply. There's no question about that. So you could do that by deregulating the various rent controls and boarding, zoning boards, or you could do what Vienna did, which is build lots of public housing.
Okay, here's the sad thing. There are so many more points that I want to get at and pick apart. We don't want to attack you. No, certainly, because there's a lot of interesting stuff here, and some of it I see is dead wrong. Other stuff is really thought-provoking, and I would like to continue the discussion, so please come back at some point.
It would be my absolute pleasure.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jesse. I really appreciate it. All right, millennial, Gen Xer, baby boomer, gummer. Is yours the greatest generation? We'll play My Youth Was Better Than Yours with Fox Business's own Stuart Varney. That's coming up next.